Now, it's a long drive down here from Alberta, and so I thought in order to help me with my driving, I'd bring a friend with me, but he's actually an imaginary friend, and this is a fellow I call Casey, and you kind of got to get a little bit of a visual on this fellow. He's quite up there in years, and he's a hermit. He doesn't like to come to town. He lives in his little cabin way back up there in the hills all by himself, and he just likes it that way. He hardly ever, it'll be sometimes months before he'll come into town to get some supplies. But the one thing he'll do whenever he's in town is he always likes to take and go over to his doctor's office and have a checkup to make sure he's got a good, clean bill of health before he heads back up into the hills. And it was at a time like that he was at his doctor's office. Well, he said, "Doc," he said, "lately every time I look out there, well, I keep seeing this brown spot." The doctor said, "Brown spot, Casey? What is that?" And he said, "Yeah, the doctor, it's the darndest thing. Every time I look out there, I just keep seeing this brown spot." So the doctor said, "Well, that's a kind of a funny one." He says, "I'll tell you what." He says, "I'm going to go ahead and do your usual checkup, but I think what I want to do is I want to take out your artificial eye, and I want to look at it. I have a microscope in the back, and there could be a flaw in the glass or something, and that might explain what your problem is." So he takes this artificial eye, and he goes into the back, and he comes back a few minutes later, and he's just chuckling away to himself, and the doc says, "You know, I don't know how in the world you did this, but I think I got your problem solved, because I can see on that eye of yours, under the microscope, why there's this little speck of horse manure." Horse manure? Well, how in the world would a guy ever get horse manure on it? Wait a minute, I think I know now that I think of it. About a month ago now, I was heading way back there in the hills with my favorite pack horse, Earl. And you know, we were going on that trail that goes into the great big timber. You know that trail that gets in them great big trees there where it gets really skinny in that one spot, you know? All of a sudden, this great big grizzly bear jumped out. Well, Earl, he got so nervous, he started to back up. Well, I said, "Earl, for gosh sakes, you silly fool, would you quit that backing up? You're going to fall off the trail and lose the pots and pans and all the food, and we're going to starve to death up here." Well, Earl, he quit backing up, and I was sure relieved, and we carried on, and every little hair seemed to be in place, but you know how that trail breaks out of the timber, and then it gets way up there in them big boulders, way up high. You know that spot. A great big grizzly bear jumped back out again. Well, this really scared Earl this time. And so he started to back up, and I said, "Earl, for gosh sakes, quit that backing up. You're going to fall off the trail and lose the pots and pans and all the food, and we're going to starve to death up here." But Earl was so nervous he couldn't help himself, and he just kept on backing up. And I said, "Earl, for gosh sakes, you silly fool, quit that backing up. You're going to fall off the trail and lose the pots and pans and all the food, and we're going to starve to death up here, sure." Earl couldn't help it. He was so nervous, he just kept on backing up, and I had to do something quick. So I hurried up, and I ran around behind. I popped out my eye, shoved it up his butt, and said, "Here, Earl, look for yourself." No. No. That's a true story. Now, I'll tell you, I like applause and clapping and everything just as much as anybody else, but I have to make a confession right here and now. I got brought down here on account of I'm supposed to be a poet, and I do need to point out there wasn't one thing in that rhymed at all. So, in order to make it fair, I thought, well, I should have a poem about Casey, so this is how it goes. Casey had a problem. He knew he had to fix. He couldn't wait no longer living out there in the sticks. You see, it got right painful every time he took his seat. Those pointy jab sensations, not to mention burning heat. Now, I've heard them called the ring of fire. Some just say they're piles that blossom on cold tractor seats or saddles rode for miles. When things got right uncomfortable and caused poor Casey grief, well, he'd pop his glass eye in his mouth and suck it for relief. Well, he finally couldn't take no more, so into town he rode, and like a gumdrop with his eye, into his mouth it goed. But on the trail, his old horse Earl stumbled in a rut, and that artificial eye fell deep into his gut. Well, they wheeled him in for surgery and said this won't take long before old Casey got to say that something might be wrong. Well, during that procedure, that one eye made of glass peered out past all the trimmings, fogged over from the gas. Well, the doctor and the nurses nearly fainted there in fear at what was looking back at them beyond their patient's rear. The anesthesiologist turned up the gas to high and, pondering malpractice, said, "I figure he's a spy." When Casey woke, they told him he was a medical mystery to wink at them so cheerful from his hemorrhoidectomy. Now, how that eye got back in place is something we know not. Except for now, when Casey looks, he sees this small brown spot. Thank you so very much. I used to ride, I still do it actually. I every once in a while I'll get out my red coat, out uniform, and lead parades, and so it's a popular thing to do. And I've led lots of parades, lots and lots of times. I've been up on a back of a big black horse and leading a parade in my red outfit, if you can kind of get a visual on that. And so it was a sunny summer morning in the middle of June, I recall. I was sitting in this dark bay gilding in my Mountie red coat and all, and the parade was about to get started, of which I was asked to lead, when this pretty young miss approached and asked, could she pat my steed? Now she was shined up fancy, squeezed into a pair of white jeans and wearing a banner that told me that she was one of the queens. Well, I suppose I should have foreseen it when I felt that bay's back heave. Maybe I should have suggested, this might be a good time to leave, because he just came in from the pasture where the lush green grasses produce. Shouldn't have been any wonder. He might be just a tad loose, but it was too late when I noticed. Not a pretty sight there to see. A couple of gallons of discharge splashed up to just past her knee. Well, she looked at her outfit in horror at that greeny brown coating that got her. So I said, now, darling, don't panic. It's only some grass and some water. And then I rode off kind of indignant, like Mounties sometimes get. And I left her in a dither, up to her knees in it. Thank you. I was in this RV campground not all that long ago, and what I saw was better than any TV show. You see, this fifth-wheel trailer and a dually diesel Dodge rumbled through the front gate to find a place to lodge, and then down the lane it idled, the missus by his side, West Coast mirrors all focused, the trailer 8 feet wide. Years of driving tractor was etched upon his face, but he looked some uneasy. The farm was more his pace, 'cause he was plenty handy at backing up a Massey to where the drawbar lined up a cultivator chassis, and he could run a combine, sitting up there high, picking swaths up centered while unloading on the fly. But parking this here RV, with strangers round to watch, made backing up a nightmare he didn't want to botch. Well, the missus, always helpful, out of the truck she got, and without hesitation marched straight to his blind spot, and then, making tiny gestures as if it were in braille, she motioned him to back up. With her he couldn't fail, except for she had vanished completely from his sight. Well, he uttered a frustration that put her on the fight. Well, then he praised her efforts to soften up the tension, while mumbling some other things out loud he didn't mention. Then a neighbor, uninvited, a stranger to them yet, waved his arms resembling the guy who parks a jet, and as they faced each other, since he looked in the mirror, well, left and right was backwards and made it tough to steer. Well, then the missus' motions commenced to come in view. Signals not in one mirror now, but visible in two, and now enthusiasm was dancing on her face. Her hand waved like a metronome, her version of erase. Well, to him, all her waving just meant that she approved, so he didn't see the hydrant that his trailer just removed. Well, along about the fourth try, he gave a hearty yelp that cleared the space behind him of uninvited help, and then driving off indignant, like farmers sometimes do, he headed for the designated sites marked "Just Pull Through." Thank you very much.